Hello all, welcome to this video. My name is Suleiman and I'm going to explain JPA repository in Spring Boot. In the last video, we talked about Spring Boot and we created two APIs. One is for authentication and one is for registration. And in that example, we used collection for storing the data, the user information we stored into a map. In this example, we'll convert that to a database-based application and I will be using MySQL and I will use JPA repository to connect to that MySQL database in my Spring Boot application. So JPA repository is a very important feature that Spring Boot provides, wherein a lot of boilerplate code is now removed, and then we can very easily perform the CRUD operations. Not just CRUD operation, but also if you want to query the data, you can very easily do that with the help of JPA repository. So let's get started and then I'll show you how we can use this JPA repository into our Spring Boot application. I will be using the same application that we used earlier, rather we created in the earlier video. Um, what we did in that example is like we created a controller. That controller had this UR request mapping API/UN, and then it has two APIs, register user and authenticate user. And then we got this request parameters converted into user info object and then called the service method. And the service method, we saved that information, that user data into a map, a Java collection basically. So in this video, what we will do, we will change this and we'll store the data into database. So let's get started. So first of all, we have to make a couple of changes to our Spring Boot application. We have to add two more dependencies. Firstly is the Spring Data JPA dependency that we have to add, and we also have to add MySQL driver since we are connecting to MySQL. So if I already have my project ready, how do I then add it? So you can create this project, generate it, and copy those dependencies and put in your pom.xml file. I already have those dependencies copied here, so I will copy and I will paste into my pom.xml file. There you go. Right, and then your build is successful. That is the first step. You will have to add the dependency for data JPA and then the connector, basically the driver for MySQL. Next, we have to create the entity class. So earlier our user info was a very plain Java class, but now we have to change it to an entity class because I want to map this user info class with my database table called user info. And for that we have to use few annotations. The first annotation to make this class as an entity class is @entity. I am importing from a proper package. And then this is the optional annotation @table. Even if you don't use, that's fine. And then I can use name is equal to user underscore info. So my class name is user info, but my table name would be user underscore info. That you can do. If you don't write this @table, by default your table name would be user info small. Then I'll copy this here. Every entity class must have a primary key, so I'll have to make any of the field as primary key. And so if you look at these properties, email is the only unique value that we have in this entity class. So I will mark this field as @id, and that's all. So if you want optional annotation @column, that you can use, but by default I want all the names which are similar to these names. So these are the basic annotations that we require. So now this is done. What we also have to do is let me show you that. So if I run it now, because I have added this starter data JPA, and if I run my application, let's see what happens. You see there, my application is not starting, and it is saying that application failed to start, and the description it's showing is failed to configure data source. URL attribute is not specified, or no embedded data source could be configured. This error we got only after adding these two dependencies. Earlier, if I remove the dependencies, it will work, because that's the beauty of Spring Boot. What happens is whenever you add the dependencies in your pom.xml file or in your build path, if you have any dependency, Spring Boot will automatically configure the required beans for working with it. So in this Spring Data JPA, we will need to create entity manager factory, entity manager. These beans are required, and so for creating that, we need a data source bean. So all those requires different configurations to be made. So now how do I resolve this error? This error I can resolve by adding data source properties. So data source properties like spring dot jpa dot data source, okay, dot url dot username dot password. So I will not write all of this to save my time. I already have these properties here. I will copy these properties and paste in my application dot properties file. In Spring Boot, this is a very important file where you can configure most of the things. Like if you want to change your Tomcat port, your context URL, everything you can configure from this application dot properties file. And here what I am doing is I am specifying spring dot data source dot URL. That's the URL I am using for my MySQL. Let me change this to sample DB. Okay, sample DB, and these additional parameters are for creating the database if it is not present, or do you want to use SSL and so on. This is a username for my MySQL password, and these are additional JPA properties in which we are specifying that do you want to display all the generated SQL, because Spring Data JPA will automatically convert your queries into SQL queries. So whatever generated queries that we have, you want to display that in your console. Along with that, I can also use one more, that is format SQL. Also, I'll make it as true so that all the queries will be shown in the formatted way. And then this is a very important property, spring.jpa.hibernate.ddl-auto is update. This means if the tables are already there, use those existing tables, and if the tables are not present, for example user info table is not created, so with this update it will create the table if not present. If present, it will automatically use that existing table. And this dialect is for converting your MySQL queries, sorry, your Hibernate queries basically into MySQL queries. So that's the configuration that is required for JPA repository. So let me now run it and see if it starts, because now we have provided URL and other attributes. It should work. There you go, it's started the server, and again it is on 8080 port. All good. Yeah. Now after adding these dependencies and after configuring this data source in your application.properties, next is using the JPA repository. How do I use? So I'll create an interface, and I'll put that interface into DAOs package, and I will call it as user info repository. User info repository. And in Spring, we have this @repository annotation, which will make it as a DO object, data access object, used for interacting with the database. The advantage it gives you is it converts all your checked exception into unchecked exceptions. Something called data access exception is there in Spring Framework. All the exceptions will be converted to that data access exception. Here I will extend my interface from this JPA repository interface, which has two parameters here. You can see one is the class name that you are creating this repository for, its user info, and what is the primary key of that class or what the table. So we created that email as a primary key. So here I'm going to specify the type, that is of type string. That's all. So now this JPA repository will give you all the methods like save, get, update, delete, all the methods will be provided. Apart from that, it also gives you find by methods. I'll show you that find by method in next few minutes. But that's all. That is my repository. I'm done. Now I want to use this repository into my service. So let me refactor this code. Let me change this to, first of all, let me remove this. And I'm going to use private user info repository, and then I will auto wire it. Okay. And now here I'll say return this, sorry, return repository dot save. See, the save method is already there. You don't have to implement that method into your service. It's already there. From where we got this method? It's basically we got it from that JPA repository. That's all. Okay, and it runs the user info object which is persisted into the database. So that's what I'm returning from here. That is for save. And what about get? So get, there are a couple of ways I'll show you. One is uh, using optional class. So let me show you that. Optional of type user info. Okay, optional is equal to repository dot find by. So there is a find by method. So find by ID. So find by ID, you will find that object by or that record by. It's a primary key. So here I will pass user info dot get email. So if any object, if any record is present with that email ID, it will return you, but it will return you in the form of an optional class. Okay. So here, so return optional dot is present is a method. If it is present, I'm going to use optional dot get, else I'm going to return null. Sorry. Okay. So if it is present, if the object is present, I'm going to get that object and return, else I'm going to return null. Is present will tell you whether that record is present. So find by ID is finding that record. Alright, that's all. That's the implementation of JPA repository. So what I'll do, I'll start, it's already started. I will hit that API. So remember we already have this request set up in our Postman. I'll be using the same request now for registration and for authentication. Let me just click on send, and there you go. It is returning us that object. That means the data is saved into the database. And because of that show SQL query, that show SQL property we configured here, it is showing that generated SQL into, there you go, insert into queries executed. So now we can see that query here, but is it really storing the data into the database? Let's go and find out. I'll open my MySQL. My password is root. Let me show databases. And remember we created this sample DB. Use sample DB. Sorry, it's use sample DB and show tables. Now there it is showing user info. Let me say select star from user underscore info, and there you go. You have that email, password, first name, last name, all is saved into the database table. See how simple it is now with the help of JPA repository. Not much code we have to write, very simple, few lines of code. But the underlining details are done by that data dependency, Spring Data dependency, which is taking care of all your boilerplate code. So that is about the authentication, sorry, registration. What about authentication? Let's go and see if that also works. And there you go, it is giving us the data, and it is from the MySQL. Let me give some invalid password. Oh, it is still receiving that information. Oh, one more thing we missed. Actually, we just have got the data by email, but we did not compare that password, right? Yeah, good that we got the error. Otherwise, we would have missed this part. Yeah, so if we got this, if we get this, let me change this code a little. So if optional dot is present, I'll get that user info, or let me just user info is equal to optional dot get, and I will compare if optional dot user info dot get password. I have to get this. Okay, dot equals reference dot get password. If that is the case, I will say return user info. Sorry, return reference or user info. Both are okay. Okay. I think one more is missing. Yeah. And then otherwise I'll return null. Okay, so that is my implementation as of now. But this we can avoid. I'll show you. Let me hit this now. It is already deployed, so I will send this request, and you see now it is returning null because it is not matching. So we have to pass that correct one. 1 2 3. All right, we are getting. Let me also insert one more record from here. Insert into user underscore info values. Email is Sachin at the rate gmail.com. First name is Sachin Sharma, comma, password is 12345. Okay, insert it now, and then this I'm using to authenticate. See there, Sachin at the Gmail 12345 password we are receiving. So it is working. So our code is working. Now, um, I told you right, we don't need this much of code to authenticate the user. There are find by methods. Like find by ID that we have, we can create few more methods, find by methods. How? So let me go to my repository, and here I can add a method public user info because it is going to return user info. And then my syntax starts with find by email and password. See, these names like email is a property, password is a property, should match, and also the parameters should match. Also the parameters should match. So find by email and password. So it should give us that object. Let me now call this from this user service IMPL, not from user service IMPL, from my controller. Sorry, not from controller, from here. So let me comment out these lines of code and then return repository dot find by email and so user info dot get email and user info dot get password. I'm returning that. So find by method. Let's see if it works. So it is returning that response. Right, you don't have to write that much of code. So earlier we have written a lot of code for comparison and all, but now this find by method is very useful. So for example, you want to find by first name. So how will you do? So public list of user info, because it is not a unique key, right? So I'll say find by first name string first name. See, this name, these properties names should match. Find by first name, find by last name, find by first or. So if you want to use or, you can also use or last name. So what will happen is it will do the comparison. It will do the or operation. String last name. Okay, so see that there's no error. Earlier it was showing some error, but now all good. That's how we can use this JPA repository to interact with the database. I hope you like this video. So please subscribe and like my videos, and do write down in the comments if you need any further information on these videos, or if you want to you would like to watch some other videos, do let me know in the comment section. Thank you. Enjoy.